Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. Today, I have the honor of having Matt Brown on the show of The Matt Brown Show, also multiple-time Amazon bestselling author, but even bigger than that, Matt, you are a veteran founder of 14 companies across 25 years with multiple successful exits. So I'm Annika Jackson, the host of Your Brand Amplified. And Matt, it's such a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you, Annika, for having me on. And just to clarify, I've also had a lot of businesses die on me. So,
Well, one of your books to that point is Secrets of #Fail. And I think that's the dirty secret that we don't talk about. People see, like any industry, right? Whether you're an athlete, an actor, a singer, or a successful entrepreneur, people look to the successes, but they don't realize all the lessons that you learned on the way. So before we get into that, I'd love for you to talk about your journey. We're talking a little bit about your origins in South Africa before you came to the States, but what propelled you into the world of business? And I know you do a lot of other things now that we're going to get into in this interview, and took you from Africa and South Africa specifically into the United States.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of ground to cover. I'll try and be concise. So my father was an entrepreneur and I watched him be successful, but also watched him fail. And during apartheid, it was like 1994, there was a political activist called Chris Hani. And he was really the voice of the resistance and, anti-apartheid, the system and the government and that stuff. And my father at the time, he owned a firearms shop. He was selling guns. Ooh. And one day, Chris Hani got assassinated at the front of his home in Johannesburg. And basically, the country just went into like this meltdown. And a lot of the affluent people, they went and they bought guns because South Africa was literally on the brink of civil war. Nelson Mandela was still in prison at the time. And so he was incarcerated. And so basically the country just freaked out and they all went and bought guns. And my dad's business at the time just made a lot of money. I mean, he was taking like 6 figures a day over the counter. It was crazy. There were riots in the streets. And at the time, I was 14 years old. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I saw what was happening. And so my dad was successful pretty quickly through this gun shop of his. And anyway, thankfully, South Africa didn't go into a civil war at the time. But what I did see was how my dad wasn't able to scale that business. And also, by the way, that business eventually died. It failed. Wow. And so I was watching this and you're like, how can you be so successful? I mean, if you think about the market timings, having the right business just at the right time, okay, there's obviously a very South African context. But how do you make so much money and then how can that business die on you? Like, I don't understand that. And then for me personally, I had 2 passions in my life, as I grew a little bit older, like 18, 19. I had 2 passions. One was music, the other one was business. And I moved to London and I founded a record label. And so at the time, the whole industry was changing. It was moving from vinyl to digital downloads. And so I founded a record label called Voodoo Vinyl, and I created something called the Voodoo Vinyl Remix Network. Cool. And so basically what I was doing was I was preying on an old paradigm, an old idea that if you were a creative artist, that you needed to have a record label to release your music for you. Okay. Right. And so Napster was happening at the time. Now I'm showing my age. But Napster was like, people were downloading pirated music and Metallica was freaking out. And it was just like a really disruptive time. Social media was just starting. I think Facebook had maybe been founded. And anyway, long story short, I was able to buy the master recording rights of original music for nothing. Oh my gosh. So my cost of acquisition was really low. And I was able to do that on the promise that you give me your master recording rights for free and I'll release your music around the world through digital downloads. So we had an online store. And so anyone around the world could come and buy our music. But what we would give you access to is a whole bunch of remix artists. And Frankie Knuckles at the time had just won, the World's Best Remixer Award. It was on like the MTV Music Awards. Like it was now a thing, remixing. What was that? And you had all these major artists that would pay these, creative people to remix. Like they would create, like Kylie Minogue would pay an artist to create a house song, as an example. And so this is the whole context at the time. And so we were releasing like 120 digital albums a year globally. And my artists would remix these original songs, right? And we would just create this network. So you would basically have the opportunity to have other people make new music from your original. And so that was basically the business. And that started to scale. And eventually I sold that. And then I was 26 suddenly and I was in London and I thought I could walk on water, your first, your first business, and you started. So luckily, the universe was going to fix all that for me because the next one failed. And so that's pretty much been my journey. Like founding companies, selling companies. I build and sell if I can scale them, but it's hard. 99% of startups fail in the first four years. So to get through that period is a real achievement. So, and I started the Map Round Show 10 years ago, and what I've been looking to do is make a difference to entrepreneurs. Having very important conversations that I feel are relevant, like failure as an example, and influence as another example, but just using my platform to make a difference, and so that's what's brought me to the US.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, I don't think we talked about the music connection previously, and I used to be a club promoter and launched a magazine called Revolution in the year 2000, which was a dance music magazine that came with a CD every month back when we had moved to CDs. And I used to get digital music all the time when I moved from like people sending CDs in the mail to promote stuff to then the record labels sending like a digital playlist. And so my iTunes is still full of music that I don't even know if I've ever listened to because I just immediately download it back because that's what you did back then. You didn't have the streaming capabilities of now. So I definitely remember the days of MySpace and Napster and then Friendster before we all jumped to Facebook and on and on and on. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. It would have been awesome if we had met back then.
I know, right?
Yeah, I know. Well,
yeah, I was hanging out with like Masters at Work and Winter Music Conference, throwing parties with them at Winter Music Conference and doing all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so, I think you were probably more successful in the music industry than I was.
Oh, no.
I was more of the DJ, producer DJ.
Yeah.
Producer guy. Yeah.
But that's amazing. And I think that when you start, I find this often when people start from the music business, particularly, there's a just organic skill set that you learn that you then can apply to so many other industries. And so I'm interested to, if that was true for you as the label maker.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, if you find any company and you're creating, it's weird, right? If I look back at all my successful businesses, it was always the same formula, but executed in a different context, Right. So there was obviously Voodoo Vinyl, which was music. Then Digital Kung Fu was lead generation or pipeline generation for technology companies like Microsoft, this kind of stuff. But it was basically the same three things. It was like strategy, content, and systems. That's it. And, solving different problems, of course, and positioned differently. But it's funny how that skill set of yours, even my current business, Showworks Media, it's just almost the same formula, but executed differently. And I think, to your point, like if you can figure out, listen, no one's starting a new business that's completely like novel. Do you know what I mean? Like no one's doing that. Like it's basically an improbability. It's like 99.9% of businesses are not novel. What they are doing is they are taking existing things and making them better, right? They're making them more efficient. Artificial generative intelligence, in our case, for self-publishing books for CEOs of tech companies, but it's all about doing things in a more efficient manner. And that's what creates value because everybody wants value faster, right? And so if you can figure out your own formula for success and then you just map it to something that you're passionate about, and that's very important because if you wind up building a business like my lead gen business that you don't love, it's a horrible thing to be successful and not fulfilled. I think that's the ultimate failure. And so when you figure out your own success formula, just like do it again, sell your next company for more money. Do you know what I mean? And I've spoken to CEOs, entrepreneurs that are like, you have these like multiple time exits, like they're just seemingly always successful. And the reason for that, I believe, is because they have this formula, like they've done it before. And all they then do is the same thing, maybe in a different industry, but they do it bigger and they do it better because they've now learned, okay, well, that worked. I got a $10 million exit. How do I get to 100? And even then they do it faster, right? So when it took 5 years or 10 years to do a $10 million exit, they'll do a $100 million exit in 5. And it's because of this idea of mapping your own success formula to something that works, that maps to your skill sets, and that you just rinse, repeat.
You make it sound so easy.
It's not. It's so not. It's not. And I don't mean to create that perspective at all. It's very rare to find entrepreneurs that do this. Like one of my clients, Shannon Scott, he runs an HR technology group, and what he does is he buys companies with EBITDA profits, right? And he just adds more companies to his portfolio. Because if you have 10 companies doing, $10 million a year in EBITDA, what does the collective value of that portfolio look like to a PE firm? Well, they're going to pay you a 20 times multiple on that. So if he's buying 10 companies and he spends, $1 million or $10 million, or let's just say $100 million on each, he's going to make $1 billion off a PE firm who wants 10 years of future cash flow for their limited partners, you see. So then he does that. Now what? Well, he buys more companies and you know what I mean? And the thing for him and like many of us is that if you work within a particular industry like HR tech, right, you suddenly know everybody. You know who's building what, and you know who would buy HR tech in terms of which PE firms, or maybe, IPO, the whole group, I don't know. But if you niche into a specific thing, you start to see everything starts to become clearer, and niching, to your point, like what makes it successful, like, you make it sound so easy. Well, it's because, again, one of the formula or the steps in the formula is choose a niche, like choose to be for someone, because when you do that, doesn't matter who it is, everything becomes clear. Your competitors become clear, your pricing becomes clear, your product solution becomes clear, your go-to-market becomes clear, and suddenly you're no longer invisible because you were for everyone. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And so now you're for this thing only. And so you have to choose. But when you choose, all those things become clear, and then your success formula becomes clear, you see? But it's definitely fraught with with uncertainty and a whole lot of failure.
Well, and I think also you're touching on so many things that people need to understand when they're going into business for themselves. A lot of times people want to be all things to all people, and they don't think about those specific customer personas and avatars. To your point, they don't niche down enough. And then the shiny object syndrome. So somebody comes along and says, well, you're having a lot of success with this. Can you also do this? And we'll pay you X amount of money. And so then you go, oh, maybe I should add that service, even though it's not necessarily in your skill set or in your perfect avatar range. And so I think those are two things that I see a lot when I'm working with businesses on their communications and strategy and branding, is they want to be all things to all people, or they're like, oh, but they'll offer us funding if we do X, Y, Z. And I'm like, but that's not what you're good at. So how do you combat that?
Well, this is the problem with visionaries. They all want to chase the new, and they're romanced by the shiny new stuff, when all they should be focused on is two things: the more and the better, And so here's what happens when you choose the new all the time. Like, to your point, like you work with these clients or what have you, and they want to add to their services, because if you add another service, then you can effectively unlock another revenue stream. So let's just say you're a digital advertising agency, and typically what you would do is you would create content for social, do social ads, and that's always been your bread and butter. We'll help you to reach 1 million people a year, whatever, and, we'll put 10,000 people on your website, generate your leads, okay? And then, to your point, what about PR? Well, let's add PR into that. We'll also do digital PR for you, but that's a fundamentally different discipline. But then what if we added a technology product that could track, like an online reputation management tool? Let's add that in as well. So now you've added in these two additional services, but your whole ambition is to scale your company. So this is what happens. Now you've added these two extra services. Who's going to deliver that? And it was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, we'll hire someone. Okay, cool. So you're going to hire someone. What's that going to do to your profit and loss statements every month? That's going to add an expense. Yes, but then we'll add margin, and we'll charge a price that allows us to absorb that cost. Okay, who's going to sell it? No, I need a salesperson also. Oh, okay. So now you need a salesperson also. So now you've added 2 new people, but then you need a manager to manage those 2 people. Then you got to have an ops person that then is going to create the systems and processes and standard operating procedures to deliver on that. And so now what have you actually done? Well, you've added maybe some margin, but really you've added a whole bunch of complexity to your whole business, right? And so your opportunity to scale, right, to become successful is actually reduced. So the trick I've learned is to say no more often. There's a book that I'm writing now, it was coming out in February, called $1 Million Principles, or Secrets of $1 Million Success, where I talk about the power of saying no. Because, going back to the romance of new, new is not always better. It really isn't. And so you define yourself not by what you say yes to, but by saying no. Like, what can you say no to? And I think the best businesses are the simple ones. And the more simple you can keep your business, like from a proposition to who delivers it and whatever, the more it's going to be successful. I mean, car washes.
Yeah.
The most simple business in the world. I mean, I think it was like Andrew Tate or something like that. He has probably not him, but there was a media guy, I saw it on the news the other day. And so his car wash business makes $2 billion a year in the US.
Gosh.
There's another billionaire that I know in my network. And when I met with him, Jordan Zimmerman, he's got loads of cash. And so I said, we got chatting, and he's like, I said, like, so what do you do with your money? He's like, well, I buy caravan parking spots all around the US. In fact, I own 60,000 of them. And it's the most profitable, simple, cash flow positive business like ever. Like, he doesn't have to think about it. It's literally concrete cement with like, a charging station for your RV or whatever. You know what I mean? And he has 60,000 of these things all over the US, makes him shit tons of money. But it's the most simple business in the world, you see?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the challenge though is to choose. You have to actually choose to do this. Like for us, last year we were doing all these like influence, so much stuff around influence and this and that. And then we were like, well, what's the one thing that actually drives influence the most? Well, it's becoming a best-selling author. Okay, cool. Well, let's do that. Okay. So now we've got a system, right? Because it's simple, but we have a system, not like all these things that require all these people to deliver. But we have a very simple system. So we can deliver a best-selling book 300% faster and at 50% less cost than anyone in North America.
Oh my gosh.
Right? In fact, we can create a manuscript in 8 hours and everyone else is taking 6 months. So that's what I mean is a competitive advantage, but it's literally the simplest thing. Dude, you want to become a best-selling author? Yes. Okay. Why aren't you one? I don't have the time. Great. Well, we can do it all for you. Do you know what I mean? And so we can solve all those problems, but it's a simple thing. It's a simple thing. And that, so I hope that all helps, but just keep it,
That helps so much. And I will say I've been guilty of this as well. When I moved back to Los Angeles in 2019, I was just going to focus on PR. Now, when I lived in Houston, I had other businesses. I had a retail store, I had a social club, I did other things, and I was like, I'm just going to do PR. In fact, I named my agency Annika PR. But then I found that people needed other services. And I know marketing because I started in marketing. I know some digital. I know a little bit of this and that. And I started adding team members. And I definitely fell prey to that scope creep and made those decisions and started bringing more people on and all of that stuff. And so I love that you're talking about the power of saying no, because it's something that so many of us are bad at, especially I think women in business. Often we want to be the nurturers. We want to take care of everybody. We want to say yes to everybody. And it's something that I have to combat every day and learn to say no. And this is kind of my year of saying no, of stepping back and stepping into my power and saying, this is what I'm really good at and what I love doing, and that's all I'm going to focus on. So I think this is a really important message for the audience to hear right now, because this is one of those things, as we're teeing up, I feel like I'm doing a slow roll into 2024. And this is the month of really, everybody needs to level set and figure out what they want to do and who they want to be and what that's going to look like. Yeah. So your advice is very actionable and appropriate. And your expertise of not only your own businesses, but talking to so many super successful business owners. Now, when you started your podcast, there weren't really a lot of podcasts at that point. I mean, podcasting is 20 years old at this point. Mm. I think really during the pandemic is when people started getting on the platform a little more. So what was it like being one of the first people out there? I don't even know if you consider yourself in that vein.
I certainly would say I was probably like one of the early adopters of the medium, right. I think. I was certainly first in like literally as in like the one or two, number one and number two in Africa, because people didn't even know what podcasts were back then. And obviously iTunes happened, and then I was like, there's a thing called a podcast. So the US is where it all started. And at the time, I was head of strategy for TBWA in Africa. And so I was just looking for trends, like digital trends. I was like, what's this thing? It's called a podcast. I was like, well, cool. Let me start one. And what I'll do is I'll do 3 episodes only. I just want to have some content for a product launch, but I had no intention of doing it for as long as I have. And, now having done so many episodes, like 850 thing. But it was lonely. That's what it was like. Because, when I published my first episode, like I went to bed and super pumped to see how many thousands of downloads I got, when I woke up the next day, and when I logged on, I was fascinated to see the fact that I had failed massively, where there was only 1 download and it was me from the day before. So So, it was lonely. But I do believe sometimes like the medium chooses you versus you choosing the medium. And even at the time, it wasn't even called the Matt Brown Show. It was called the Digital Kung Fu Show. And as I started to get, 50 episodes in, and then suddenly I was like, damn, like I've stopped scripting everything. And I'm actually now leading conversations with all the sharks from the Shark Tank, the TV series, And by the way, like they're all just like me. You know what I mean? Like you have this imposter syndrome, like, oh, he's on TV, so he's obviously better than me, And then when you meet them, you're like, nah, actually, they're pretty much the same. There's no real difference. They've just, built something successfully, right?
Right.
And then one day, a friend of mine, Rich Mulholland, he's a professional speaker. I'm like episode 100, and I've got partnerships with Entrepreneur magazine, and my profile's starting to grow. And so now I'm like, damn, there's actually a lot of ROI in podcasting. Mm-hmm. And Rich was at an entrepreneurs organization meeting, and the question was asked in the chapter, like, what are your favorite podcasts?
Oh.
And he said, well, it's the Digital Kung Fu Show. And he was like, well, why is it called the Digital Kung? So he phoned me and he said, dude, like, I don't understand why you don't call it the Matt Brown Show. Like, why is it called the Digital Kung Fu Show? And I was like, no, I can't have my name in it, fear of judgment, this kind of thing. And eventually I was like, yeah, fuck it, I'm going to rebrand it. And I did. And it was the best thing ever, because then that's when things really kind of took off, because people were like, oh, actually, I listened to his show because I want to hear what Matt has to say, And so that's kind of where and then we got into live podcasts. So, doing shows in front of live audiences and things like that. And I covered the crypto space in 2019, sold out dozens of live shows. I had media partnerships with CNBC. They were broadcasting my events to like 50, 60 countries around the world. And so then I was like, damn, there's a lot of ROI in podcasting. But it was lonely in the beginning. But, like anything, if you just persevere, like success can happen at any moment. Like I've had so many moments where I've phoned my producer, Maverick, who's been with me since the beginning. And I say, dude, I don't want to do this anymore. And he's like, why? And I'm like, well, because I'm bored. I'm tired of talking to people, Like, how many business conversations can you have in your life? Then he's like, no, just keep going. Like, do another one. I'm like, oh, fine, I'll do another one. You know what I mean? And then it's like, oh, I really enjoyed that conversation. And so, it's very up and down being a platform owner. It takes a lot of time, and most people quit, there's a whole graveyard of could have been podcasts.
Absolutely.
But the one thing for me is just like, I don't quit, I'm a sucker for punishments.
I can tell. But what took you from those initial 3 podcast interviews to deciding to continue with this platform?
I was just starting to enjoy the process, the process of being a host,
Yeah.
And the reason for that really was because I'm an introvert. So I don't actually like people. I like people I know and trust, right? But if you send me off to a dinner party with a bunch of strangers, it's like my idea of hell. And so when I was meeting all these CEOs, I was like really uncomfortable with the process. Like, oh shit, I got to talk to a stranger for a whole hour, especially a CEO of this listed company. And I've got to hold my own and this and that. But every time I had another conversation, I learned something, when I was like, damn, that's changed my own life, or the way that I think about a certain thing. And by the way, that certain thing was usually about how I was thinking about myself. Because once I'd interviewed all the sharks from the Shark Tank, and I was like, yeah, there's no difference between them and me. Suddenly I was like, well, I'm thinking more confidently, And so the show was really a transformational tool that, I used to transform my own inner game, like the way that I thought about myself first and foremost, and then also the way that I felt about the world. And so that whole piece externally was really about perspective. So if you're rich in perspective, you can always generate wealth. But if you're poor in perspective, you will always be poor. Wow. And so I believe that I have a very, very wealthy perspective on the world of business and leadership, because less than 0.2% of podcasts actually get past 700 episodes. That's a stat that was shared by me like last year.
Yeah.
So if you like in the top 0.1% of people who have had more conversations with more business leaders than anybody else, where does that put your perspective? And so that's what I mean. That's why you keep doing it, right? Is because you might learn something or you might unlearn something. And then you're able to make a more informed decision about your business. So should you keep it simple, or maybe you should make it complex, So I don't really do the show for the world. I really do it first and foremost for me, because I enjoy it. And my superpower is unlocking secrets from these super successful people. And then as a consequence, if one person anywhere in the world, benefits from that conversation or that story or that lesson or that insight or that tip, then I'm winning. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I mean by influence. It's about elevating others, and so it makes me feel good. I think people get into whatever they do, podcasting, because they want to generate a lead or make money. And I'm like, that's why you're not going to be doing it in 6 months' time. Because you're looking at self-enrichment rather than contribution.
Yes. This has been a big topic of conversation lately in a lot of groups that I'm in, is making sure that you're pouring more into people than you're taking away, because then it does come back to you. And obviously with over 850 episodes, you've done a lot of that, a lot of adding value for other people and them being able to pick up and listen to episodes and learn from the best of the best.
Yes, exactly. But, people have to be careful, because people will want everything for free if you give it, you know. So you just have to be careful about how you approach, spending your time on something like this.
Well, I'd love to talk now about your current company, Showworks Media. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but, I've talked to a few people before on the podcast about the world of publishing books and how it's changed so much. And when you see a book that's a New York Times or Wall Street Journal bestseller, it means something, but it doesn't always mean what we as a consumer would think it would mean. And so let's talk about the world of self-publishing. So you're saying that this is a trend that's continuing, and that is a great way for people to show that they are a thought leader, they have influence, and that they're the one that you want to work with.
Yeah, exactly. So if I write about this in my book, Secrets of Influence, I call it the ultimate business card that you can ever have as a best-selling book. If you have 3 or 4, then that's even better. And so people want to do business with people they trust.
Right.
Okay, so what drives trust? Credibility. What drives credibility more than any other thing? A podcast? Maybe. Podcast with 850 episodes? Better. A podcast owner with 3 best-selling books?
Yeah.
Okay. You can start to see what drives credibility. So, I can get into any boardroom or network in the world off the story around and the reputation and the credibility around the show. And oftentimes, going back to the Jordan Zimmerman one, he said when he arrived on the show, he said to me, dude, I don't do interviews. I don't. But when I saw that you had done 850 episodes and you were a 3-time best-selling author, I knew I wanted to spend this time with you. And that's a billionaire, hey? So the thing for me is it's all about what will people find when they search your name. So if they Google your brand Amplified or Anika Jackson, what are they going to find, right? And by the way, people are doing this for your competitors too.
Yeah.
So if you are, as an example, in a complicated market or a competitive market, or you're selling something complex, like a software as a service backup solution, whatever, you're in a competitive market. So these buyers of your products and services, they also have a lot of choice. And so money is not necessarily, the commercial offer is important, of course, but it's not the only reason. They want to know that you have solved this problem better than everybody else. You genuinely built something novel and unique. And so what they will do is they will search for your competitors' names and they will search for yours. And whatever they find there on the social web, the digital blueprints, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be influencing their decision on whether to take a meeting with you, whether to pay a higher premium because they believe you're the one with the best solution. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And we did this with one of our clients, is Haiku, and met Simon Taylor through my show. They literally are the software as a service data backup business, fastest growing in the world, actually. And when I met Simon, he said, dude, what do you do? And I said, no, it's influence, blah, blah, books, etc. And he said, should I actually need this? And when I asked him why, he said, well, we have to do a massive amount of education globally to chief information security officers, CIOs, CEOs, etc., because they don't actually know they have the problem that we solve. So if we can't tell them that, or explain to them or get them to grasp the fact that most ransomware attacks come through vendor software as a service applications, and they don't have their data backed up, they will never buy the solution that we sell. So now comes into what Showworks does. So basically, here's the problem with self-publishing. If you write 500 words a day, 7 days a week, it'll take you 6 months to write a book. What CEO of a firm scaling up has the time to do that? And I wrote my first book, I swore I'd never do it again, and I haven't. So what I've had to do is then look at, well, what are some of the other issues here? So because you don't have the time to write the book, what do you look for? ghostwriters. Okay,
Right.
cool. So what's a ghostwriter going to cost you? Minimum $50,000, sometimes upwards of $250,000, depending on the seniority and stuff. Guess how much time they're going to need? 6 months. Okay, that's fine. And then you still don't even have a launch campaign for your book. That's a problem. You have to invest in that too. And then most self-published books are something like 90% of them don't actually create any form of commercial value. It's a major problem. So we looked at all of this as a team and we're like, no, fuck this. We need to change all of this. So what we actually now do, and there's 3 things that drive a book now, where we can deliver it 300% faster. So the first thing is strategy. You need to know what your influence strategy is. Like, what is the story we're going to tell? Why are we doing it now? Who are we trying to influence? Why are we trying to influence them? Blah, blah, blah. And so we have a process that we use. But from that influence strategy, we create a video production plan, not a book production plan.
Interesting.
And the reason for that is because you need content to launch your book. So we will shoot videos based on the storyline that we want to tell. And there's a framework that we use, especially in B2B, that works like it's bulletproof. But basically, it's called the P3 framework. I write about this in my book. But it's basically the problem, the product, and the proof. And you shoot videos based on that narrative or that structure of story. So you land the problem and you really get into it. Like, why is, 52% of ransomware all coming through SaaS? Why don't you know about this problem, Dave? Like, issues. And, here's what happens when a ransomware attack actually comes to reality. Like, hospitals get shut down. Kids on life support, don't get those machines working, blah, blah, blah. Great. So what's the solution or the product that you built? Okay, well, here's what we've done. Here's how it solves the problem. And then you get into the proof. Well, where have you solved this before? Well, IQ solved it for the Boston Red Sox. We interviewed the Boston Red Sox, filmed that whole thing. So now you've got an amazing proof. So then we take that body of work and then we repurpose it into like a year's worth of content. So now you've got a whole year's worth of content to market the shit out of your book. And then what you do is you take the transcripts from those videos and you run that through artificial generative intelligence. There's prompts that we've designed for this. Nice. But we're able to produce a manuscript in 8 hours. So 6 months was the old way. 8 hours is the new way. If you're a business, a CEO of a tech company, as an example, and you're evaluating other competitors, ghostwriting agencies or whatever, who are you going to choose?
Yeah, well, there's no comparison.
There's not even a comparison. So then you launch all of that stuff and we guarantee like #1 Amazon best-selling positions. We do that by giving away your Kindle version for free for the first 48 hours. We have partners that we work with to just massively, hack the algorithms. But now you're in a #1 status. We put you on a podcast tour and the whole thing takes 30 days. So
I'm floored. I'm floored right now.
That's what I mean by like, keeping things simple, because none of that would be possible if we were trying to add other things. Or we'll also manage your LinkedIn page and we'll also do this and this and that. But it's about this formula. You figure it out and then you just hammer that formula until you reach a number that you're happy with,
So you've talked about a few things: strategy and content, best-selling book as content to position you appropriately as the thought leader and the expert in your field, but also video. And so I think that's something we're also seeing. Everybody wants video, even YouTube. Now you can do YouTube shorts, you can put podcasts on YouTube, you can have long form videos still. And every social media platform is trying to figure out how to utilize this. And it sounds like you've really created an infrastructure to get people there so much more quickly. And it reminds me of speaking to Ajay Kumar of the Limitless Company, and he worked with Neil Patel on his social, and he's worked with a lot of other people. And his entire strategy is strategy, content, shoot a lot of video and have a lot of content. How long does it take you to get that year's worth of content?
You can do it in like a day, like, again, I think people misunderstand just how much things have changed now with AGI, like artificial generative intelligence. Like, people are going to GPT and going, write me a thought leadership article, puke. Like, I mean, people seem to think that's thought leadership, which it isn't. If you're using GPT to create articles and stuff like that, it's not thought leadership. The reason for that is because it's trained on all thinking that already exists, right? So if you want to be a thought leader, you cannot be saying the same things that everybody else is saying. So then again, I write about this in my book, but if you're going to be seen as a thought leader, you have to do original, non-obvious, evidence-based thinking. That's what it's about. So it's not an opinion, right? And it's not like I spent 10 years as a CMO for a Fortune 500 company and here's 5 things that I learned. You know what I mean? Clickbaity stuff. No one gives a shit about that. And our bullshit radars are so finely attuned now. Like if you're doing that, you're just wasting your time. You really are. And so the opportunity though is to think differently about, well, how could we change or significantly improve the gain for a prospect for a particular niche by using like artificial generative intelligence? Like the applications are huge and everyone is just thinking about, create like a social media post. It's rubbish. I mean, another example of this, right? This one's very cool. I'm super pumped with this. So people on LinkedIn, they're always marketing the problem or the solution, but they forget to actually market their value. So as an example, let's take the Matt Brown show. Let's say that the problem's this. So you're a CEO and you need to get your story out to 100 countries around the world. Great. Problem. Solution. I'll interview you for 60 minutes and you can promote the shit out of your business and its products and services. Solution. But is that really my value? No, it's not. What's my value? Well, my value is actually in the 850 interviews, the 4 books, the whole, like all the content, all the
audience that you've built up. Yeah.
100%, man. 100%. Like that's the value because none of those, like the content from the interviews don't exist in GPT.
Right.
They don't because they sit on my podcast. Okay. So then here's what we built. And this is true. It's basically Matt Brown AI. So you can get access to it now on my website, mattbrownshow.com. You sign up for the community, you get access to this AI web app. So basically what it's been trained on is literally all the transcripts from all the interviews from these super successful dudes and women, all the books, like just a whole massive body of work. And now what I'm able to do, and by the way, it's pretty cool. Imagine you could access the minds and the stories and the insights and the data points and all these and the lessons from these super successful people, but do it at a fraction of a second because who has got time to listen to 850 interviews? Nobody. But you want access in the knowledge, right? So you build a custom AI app, right? GPT app. And now I can do language translations. I'm able to now, like, into whole new countries in China, right? You're a Chinese business entrepreneur guy or Spanish and you're sitting in Latin America, but you don't speak English. It's not your first language. So you would never listen to my message. You would never care about all that content. And so now I'm able to do all of that. Like my team was weird. They sent me an artificially generated Matt Brown, like an avatar. Like I was speaking on camera, but it wasn't me. It was very weird. So now imagine you have Matt Brown, the avatar, speaking Spanish.
Yeah.
You see? So now I'm able to massively amplify my influence to millions of entrepreneurs all around the world. So it's no longer just a podcast, but none of that was possible 18 months ago. You see? And everyone's still like, I must find a AGI platform to repurpose my content for the podcast. It's like, yeah, that's one use case. Fine, you need it. That's more like a vitamin than a headache pill. And so that's what I mean. Like just really fundamentally thinking differently about like, well, what is now the value? Not like the problem I can solve and the solution, but like what is the real value that I can now go to market with, right? Or that I can take to the world, because that's what true influence is about elevating others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if, to your point earlier, if you influence one person around the world because they listen to an episode to do something differently in their business that equals success for them, then you've changed a life or multiple lives.
It's so cool.
So yeah.
Yeah. And also it's weird, right? So I've had this before. People listen to your stuff and you don't know about it.
Yeah.
Like it's really weird and people underestimate it. There's a random story. So when I was, just before I left for the States, I phoned the CEO because I wanted to obviously make him a client. But I went, hey, my name's Matt. I'm the, founder and CEO of Digital Kung Fu. And he's like, hang on. He said, are you Matt Brown? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, are you the guy that's always going live on LinkedIn?
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, yeah. And the podcast, he's like, yeah, I recognize your voice. I'm like, I don't even know who this guy is. Like, was he download 967 or like, like you don't know. And it's awesome, to think that when you reach 10,000 people organically, like someone's actually listening to what you're saying,
Yeah. Okay, so you have the Matt Brown Show, you have Showworks Media, and I believe we have an offer for our listeners that they can get 20% off their first best-selling book with Showworks Media.
Yep.
Do they need to have a special code or just reach out to you and say they listen
just say, hey, and just I heard you have an offer. It's fine. Anika Jackson.
Super easy. You're making it very easy for people. And then you also have your new book coming out in February. And tell us more about that book.
Yes, it's called Secrets of $1 Million Success. So basically, these are like principles. I'm a great believer in like principles. Because principles they truly do stand the test of time. So like if you think about perseverance or saying no or having a lion mentality or whatever, these are principles that you can easily understand, and they kind of been, battle hardened and proven. And so the insight though, for why $1 million, right? Because I had a small business loans marketplace platform. And I was doing research during COVID on the impact of COVID on small business loans. And I found this SBA report where they literally showed a pyramid, and they showed the distribution of businesses by revenue size. I was shocked to see it, but this is true. If you build a business that's generating $1 million in revenue, okay, a year, you're in the top 10% of all businesses that exist.
Wow.
I was like, holy shit. And if you think about it, it's like, cool, well, that's actually an achievable goal for a lot of people. Like, if people are like, 100 billion, it's like, no, you just need $1 million. Because if you, again, have a business that's doing $1 million in revenue, you can pretty much live whatever lifestyle you want. Well, it's true. Right. It's true. Unless you have ambitions to be Conor McGregor. But for everybody else, $1 million is a very cool business to say. I have a business that generates $1 million. And you don't need to, scale it and go through this whole ambition thing. You can be successful, quote unquote, Right. And so what I wanted to do, having built and sold multiple $1 million businesses, I wanted to just give these principles, stuff that's like, here's what I know to be true, So how do you get there? Well, you need these 25 principles. And then each principle is shared with a story, right, that I've personally had to go through to reach that $1 million level. So that's the whole context for the book.
Yeah. And this makes me go back to the beginning of our conversation where you're saying you've had successful companies, but you've also had companies that were not as successful.
Really?
And were there things that you did differently in those companies? Did you not follow your blueprint that made that got you to the $1 million+ for the successful exits?
Yeah, I think ambition's a double-edged sword. Yeah. You have to be very careful with your own ambition. And I remember, this digital kung fu, it just doubled revenues every year for 3 years. And then I had this opportunity to move to the States, and I was like, well, I'm going to go scale it. And I went to my mentor and I said, listen, what do you think? He's like, well, he said to me, I know guys with bigger businesses than you, with more money than you, that went to the US and failed. Why do you think you're going to be successful? And I was like, that's a very good question. Let me think about that. Because it's like, oh shit, fear. What if it doesn't work? And so then he said to me, we'll sell it. And I was like, no, why would I sell it? I was just, super successful, like no reason to sell it, and I was like, damn, but the story was really amazing. We had won Africa's Best Tech Startup. We were just hammering everybody. We were just cleaning up the markets. And I was just like, nah, I'm not going to sell it. 18 months later, COVID happened. All changed. Mm-hmm. Then I was like, snap. So what if I did sell it? What then would I have been able to do? I would have had massive runway for the US, I could have bought a business with customers, with proven product services, and then go and scale that, take all the risk out of starting a company again, And that's what I mean by ambition, you see. So what I should have done was listen and sold the company, because I would have made a shit ton of money and I would have been able to start again, However, and by the way, this whole story around market timing has come up so many times in my podcast. Companies that have been around for 2 decades, multiple businesses, loads of EBITDA, and then something changes. Yeah. And then they missed that opportunity for an IPO. Like we're talking to an acquirer, and the acquirer got cold feet because something changed. They had one bad quarter. And so one bad quarter is all an acquirer will need to justify not paying you what you think you're worth. And so, again, these are all the stories. And by the way, this is a principle actually in the book around market timing, know when to sell and know what kind of, founder entrepreneur you are. Because I don't believe, especially today, especially now with AI, most businesses are not going to survive, they're just not. And so if you're going to think about being financially free, right, and you build something where there is EBITDA there and you have a good story, seriously consider what would your life look like if you sold, rather than you're going to hold this thing for 50 years, because that's not going to happen.
Interesting. I'm definitely interested in hearing more about this, because I know a lot of people have said AI might take away some jobs, but it's going to create other jobs. So I'd love to hear a little bit. I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. Why do you think AI is going to make such a big difference to the world of business and companies being able to continue or fade away?
Yeah. The reason for that is because AI is evolving. So we're thinking about, it's just ChatGPT today. But, in 3 years' time, even in the self-publishing space, you're going to have true AGI is going to come along, and it's going to be able to write, the next Harry Potter without any human.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
What does that then mean? So self-publishers, what happens to that whole segment?
Wow.
Or publishers, traditional ones, Or what about AGI that can truly create the next Drake album without any Drake, but it sounds like Drake?
Mm-hmm. We saw that with the Beatles recently.
Yeah, man. Exactly. We always underestimate what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to truly be quick. Only the paranoid will survive. Truly. But as you said, there are opportunities that if you're thinking differently about problems with AGI and AI and stuff, then you will be able to create commercial value, and you actually can create a business at scale much, much faster than before, because that's how big opportunities will present themselves. And the ones that see them and then they commercialize them and then they find the right business model for that, and they just go full in on that, fully aggressive. How hard can I hit this thing? Those are the guys that are going to win.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely have to bring you back on in another, 6 months to a year.
Yeah, man.
See how the world's changed, how your new book's doing. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Matt, for offering your wisdom and your expertise to my listeners. It's meant a lot to me, and I know to them as well. Because like you said, I love interviewing people because I'm meeting people I wouldn't have met. And I also am learning things along the way. So right along with my audience. So thank you for being here, and thank you to the audience for coming to another episode of Your Brand Amplified. Whether you're listening to us or watching us on Traverse TV or YouTube, I'm so excited to be here with Matt Brown. Matt Brown's show will have information in the show notes with how you can reach his offer and join his community, listen to his podcast, all of the great things he's putting out there. And I'll be back again in a few days with another amazing expert to share their best practices and wisdom with you.
Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.